All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to It's Not Just Your Plan that needs updating, it's your process, Refocusing Strategic Planning, today presented by Brian Stewart. My name's Emily Knaus, and I'm going to be your session moderator today. If you have questions, please go ahead and use the chat feature, or we're really looking for some active participation today. So please, if you're comfortable, turn on your camera. If you have a question, go ahead, unmute yourself and ask that. There'll be spots where we're going to take questions, but we really are looking for active participation this morning. But again, you can always use that chat feature. We're going to be monitoring that and answering questions as we go. At the end of the session, please make sure to visit the session page, within the session platform and go ahead and fill out that session evaluation. And with that, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Brian Stewart.
Good morning. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. As Emily said and shared, we're looking for your participation as part of this. I'm really here to share and learn just as much as everyone here. I'm going to go ahead and switch screens. Give me just a moment here. And so today, the idea is to talk about how do you start a strategic plan? What's your focus of it? And I recognize that hopefully we have folks from all over the state and from all types of different districts today, whether it's, I work with the fire district, but I know we have school districts, utility districts, water districts, cemetery districts, parks and recreation districts. So hopefully we have a good mix. And hopefully people are able to share their experiences and kind of bring all of us forward with their experiences and opportunities that they've had within strategic planning. Today and this morning, I'd just like to recognize firefighter Austin Smith. He passed away Thursday last week, operating at a barn fire in the early morning hours. There was an explosion and he ended up, as he was serving his community, passing away of injuries. Today in St. Paul, where he was a firefighter with St. Paul Fire District, they are holding a memorial service for him. So we have firefighters from certainly across the region, the West Coast, and likely from across the United States, and perhaps into Canada, of people attending his services today down in the St. Paul Fairground. I think that's about 1 o'clock. So just wanted to recognize him and his contribution and sacrifice for his community. As I look at our time today, this was intended to be a co-presentation. Our fire chief, my fire chief, Nick Brown, I'll talk about him and his contributions in a moment, is spending the day with the Oregon Fire Service, celebrating the life of Austin Smith. So our time today, I wanted to share kind of how we focus our strategic planning. I want to engage with everybody here and exchange takeaways. Hopefully each of you will have something to share with the group and then take those and make our own agencies better and pay it forward to other agencies as well. So Nick Brown, he's again not here, but he does love a good snow cone. And with him, he's been the fire chief here for about 10 months, or certainly after he was selected, and about 10 months. And then I promoted to assistant chief a couple months after that. His focus is really about teams. It's really about people. He comes from a sports background. He was a national championship baseball player for a couple of years in college. He would never tell you that. But that foundation of teams and the ability of, an individual can do good things, a team can do great things, is really a core foundation of how he approaches things, and certainly impacts how we as an organization look at our processes, our people, and our service delivery. For me, I've been in the fire service for about a little over 20 years, and I've been involved in some way, shape, or form with strategic planning. After my first few years in the fire service, I had the opportunity as a firefighter to be a stakeholder for a process that was contracted out to a kind of a Bay Area firm. And it was a good experience, but it was a very end user kind of experience with it, and seemed very, didn't really seem like I was engaged. Didn't seem like the consultants were that worried about what us as firefighters or company officers had to contribute to the plan, almost like we were being a checkbox of the process. Since then, I've been involved on a number of strategic plans for different fire agencies, both as a recipient of consulting services, as a primary driver of developing the plan, as a stakeholder within plans. I've done my own consulting work with a firm, and have done plans for fire districts, school district, both strategic planning, master planning, and a few other things. So I've been around the block, but I still have a lot to learn, and looking forward to doing that today with everyone. So this course, the goal is to not focus on why planning or what a strategic plan contents are, but we need to cover those just as a little bit of a baseline. So why plan? From my perspective, we plan because we're headed someplace. Whether it's I plan at home, I plan my budget, I plan what we're going to do for a vacation. When I was a company officer on fire engines, that company officer would sit us down every morning and give us the plan for the day. Hey, this is where we're headed because we're trying to go in the same direction. I expect it's probably the same for a utility district that is tearing up streets and relaying water or sewer pipes, that you have to look out and say, hey, forecast, what are we going to do this year, next year, so we can sequence work, so we can budget. And then when you get to that day, you look at the task level planning. So we have to know where we're headed. In terms of strategic planning, I'm sorry, I just saw the little red light from the chat thing, so I'm just going to take a look here. So strategic planning, what is it? It's a multi-year plan frequently that determines what your organization is going to focus on for the next few years. It takes that big concept, that big idea, and breaks it down into different pieces. So those are achievable. You can kind of walk through step by step. Some things need to be sequenced. Some things are just as an organization, whether you're a small fire district like I've been in with one fire station and about 20 full-time employees, or smaller with no full-time employees, or as large as Clackamas or bigger, you can only chunk off what you can. So sometimes it's a sequence piece, sometimes it's a resource piece. Sometimes there's a political or social environment that you're working through. It's an opportunity to look at and drive your budget. So if you're looking at how you sequence things in terms of, do I do strategic planning in the fall or do I do it in the spring? For us, given that we are a fiscal year starting in July through June, to me, it doesn't make a ton of sense to do strategic planning in June when we've already adopted our budget for this upcoming fiscal year. So trying to look at how you sequence that, because if your budget doesn't align with your strategic plan or your work plan doesn't align with your budget, you're going to have conflict and you're not going to be really successful with either of those tools, which are tools for the success of your organization. And ultimately, its strategic plan aligns the work of all personnel, which is a key piece of, again, moving forward. Moving forward on the roadway, in terms of looking at, is it a roadmap? Sure, it's a roadmap. I like that analogy. I tried to find an image that, to me, conceptualized how I see it. And I guess this is kind of the aftermath of a strategic planning process, where you think of it as a nice linear progression, but really with changes in budget revenue, changes in personnel, someone retired, someone got hired, whatever it may be, the path tends to be a little bit more winding, but you still have those waypoints, you still have those objectives that you're trying to tackle. And so as you tackle those things, you have some typical plan elements. For us, you can think about organizational information. What's the background of the organization? When was that special district created? When was the Parks and Recreation created, and why was it? Did it separate out from a city? Did it combine with a city, whatever it may be? What are the mission, visions, and values of those? The strategies and the goals and objectives, these basic elements that define the parts of the program or the plan and tell you where you're headed. And then, of course, there's pictures and graphics and feel good stuff. If you bought a new fire engine, if you paved a new section of road, if you installed new hydrants, if you opened a new aquatic center, those are all things that you want to celebrate and that you want to anticipate, or maybe it's the plans are completed for the aquatic center that's going to break ground coming up. And those would be typical things that you would see in many strategic plans. But one of the challenges that plans have had is they get accused of being a lot of work and then being set on a shelf. And that often happens when they're driven by management. They are not aligned with the budget. They're not defined in the SMART goal concepts, a few of those things. And if you're going to go through the process of strategic planning, go through the process of making something valuable for you and your teams. If you are unfamiliar with the term SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time sensitive is one of the many mnemonics out there for it. But basically it says you have to have something defined, know how you're going to get there, when you're going to get there, to help you maintain a level of accountability. Our strategic plan for the last few years, as I came into Clackamas, came in from another agency that had merged in, looked very similar. We called it a strategic business plan. And you can see the big pieces up here of what's been included in it: a fire chief's message, the introduction, which was kind of the history of our organization and timelines of when we merged, the developing of the goals, objectives, and critical tasks. So we'd walk through in this document to share to the reader what was the process. We typically every 3 years did a much bigger process and kind of revamp the whole plan. So that 3-year mark and every year in between, we would get together stakeholders. There'd be any number of employees or volunteers, from mechanics to firefighters to finance personnel, volunteer and paid. And we would have different structures of plans or processes each year that we kind of go through, but we'd reach out to those stakeholder groups. But the 3-year mark, we typically would engage the communities. And then we would update the plans kind of throughout on a biannual basis, or semi-annual basis, twice a year. Management would update the plans about where we were at and where we were headed. We would certainly include our vision and value statements. And then we had organizational goals and objectives. This one was the picture I happened to grab was from 2020. In 2021, we had a 10th goal, which spoke to data-informed decision-making. But to kind of take a snapshot, so goal 4 is assemble, retain, and develop a highly trained, healthy, dedicated workforce reflective of the community that we serve. I happened to grab this one as an objective, just to kind of show how we used to do strategic planning and how we would lay out our goals. This one really spoke to ongoing progress rather than, I guess, achievement, progression rather than achievement. And you can see that in the way that it's structured. It speaks to a timeline. It doesn't have a deadline date. It says ongoing. The responsibilities are broken out across 3 organizations. So the training department, the fire marshal's office, and human resources department. So with responsibility and without accountability, you're really asking people to have that kind of effective interest in making this go forward. So if we neglect looking at the training chief or one person to say, this is your goal, you're responsible, and you're going to be held accountable for achieving it, you're really asking that person to be responsible and be the first one to get up and make coffee, be the one to get up and pick garbage off of the parking lot, I guess, parking spaces. You're asking people to have that innate piece of, hey, this is what I feel. I feel like I want to keep my workplace clean, so I'm going to clean up the garbage in the parking lot or in the bushes. But when it comes to looking at here and continuing to support local fire science programs, coordinating with schools, the diversity council, and those types of things, if people don't have that internal interest in pursuing those, and we're just asking one of 3 large groups to make those things happen, I think we have a less likelihood of making forward progress than if we had used SMART goal formats. But from a progression piece, I like where it was structured. I just think we adding those details and accountability piece would have made us more successful and gained more ground in a shorter period of time. Here's another example. You can look at the website. This is or Google search images. That's what I did. I was looking for ideas when we did ours with the new fire chief and the new administration. And I was looking at this one. I like this one. To me, it really speaks to being a external facing document. It's not really a planning document for the internal folks, but it, again, it articulates their mission, the vision. They've got 6 strategic values down there with the little graphics. I like the idea of the value proposition and what their goal is. And then they have their 4 strategies off to the side. It's just, for me, visually, I found it attractive. And if this is forward facing or externally facing, a positive way of sharing with your community where you're headed. This one's from Grand Rapids Fire. We've spent a lot of time, or I've spent a lot of time with Grand Rapids Fire looking at not just this plan, but really the back end of planning pieces. They're structured really well. They've been doing this for a lot of years. They've got a 4-year strategic plan, which for me starts to kind of stretch out to the back end of where I would want to be, just because picture being having this plan, which it would have been because it was started in fiscal year 19, and what COVID might have changed just for fiscal year 20, 21, and 22. So you can look forward, but recognize that change is coming. So they're great. They've got their mission, vision, values. This is a 11 by 17 piece of paper. It's a simple piece of screenshot for a computer screen. It communicates very clearly what they are and where they're headed, both for the teams that are working on things and the teams that are affected by them, whether directly or indirectly. So they have here a desired outcome. You can picture that being the end state. Fiscal year 19 strategies, 20, 21, 22. So they have things identified for each year, and these have multiple goals underneath each and tasks below those. But importantly, and differently than the objective that you just saw from us from a couple of years ago, is they have an owner of each kind of department area, and then who's the backup for that. Should Todd Vanderwall, in this case, retire, move on to a different position, they have somebody who is responsible to back them up. And then lastly, I want to share kind of our current one. And then I'd be curious to hear from the group if anyone's got perspectives of how they have been doing things. So this is what we came up with for the current fiscal year. I'm sure we'll tweak it as we look at organizational planning the next time. But we have 4 priorities, and this was done after the fire chief had met with all the station captains and the department heads. We really found out where things were at in terms of priorities for them, and meeting with his new management team. So the financial health and stability is one of our priorities. Our people are our priorities, response reliability, and then disaster management and preparedness. Financial health and stability, people are very closely tied. The fire chief likes to discuss them as the people being the heart of the organization, and the financial or finances being the blood. Without the people, we're not getting anywhere, and without the money to make us go round and round, we're not going to be able to serve our customers either. Below that, we have 5 strategies of things that we want to focus on. But then down below, you can see that we have, I think it's just 7 goals at the moment, and we've had more goals than that. Some have been completed, and some have been taken off because of changes in the political and social environment, or through other external factors. But we only have 7 goals, with the intent of driving through those and then tackling the next piece. So there's a book or a philosophy out there called the 12-week year. And it's really about trying to take those year-long processes and move them down to that 12 weeks. So you keep driving forward with kind of the philosophy or mindset that most work will take up as much time as you give it. And we drive really hard towards the end. And so if you can press that time frame to 12 weeks, you can drive really hard most of that time before you pick up the next and drive really hard, with the concept of achieving more during the year. So that's kind of our philosophy as we go through this. And I'd be curious, before we move on to the next piece, if other people have had similar thoughts or different thoughts on how they've done it or what they've seen. We'll just pause for a moment to people to type things into the chat or crop up on their camera if they'd like to do that.
This is Cheryl Johnson. I have one question for you. I really like the format. It's nice that it's concise and shown on one page. I'm just curious on your goals that are listed in the bottom. Are those in a priority order? And I'm only asking because the finance and the people are not grouped together.
That's a great question. So these here are not listed as this priority that you see listed references the priorities kind of up in that gray bar up above, but the 7 goals listed here are not 1 through 7 in terms of priority. These are all equally weighted in our eyes, and down the road, if we had a or when we have, I shouldn't say if we had, but we will have at some point, challenges because of resources or time in completing something, then we will have to have that discussion and kind of shift where we're going to put resources to make sure we're tracking. But yeah, as listed here, they're not in a priority order.
Thank you very much.
Let's see. And then comments about not sure if our group could finish in 12 weeks. Yeah, you have to, I think, be attentive to what resources you have. We'll talk about that on the next slide a little bit. Every group is different. And I think the idea for me is biting off the chunks that you think you can bite off and build on success. So if you think you can accomplish something in 12 weeks, make that happen. If you think you can accomplish something in 24 weeks, do that. If it's going to take you a year, do that. But for us, we're approaching it from kind of that effective piece with people is we want to have success and build on success rather than see things not be completed. We don't want to be the organization that tackles things and gets to 80% of the way and then finds a shiny penny and gets distracted. So whatever works for your organization and helps you find success and then encourages people to build on that is fantastic. And then another individual has concerns about what could be spent on with 2 managers and 3 admin support staff. Very different than my organization, but similar to where I was from with my prior fire organization. I have concerns about a lot of time on what could be spent on a paper chase. Fantastic comment. If you're spending more time working the plan than working the goals and objectives, that's certainly disproportionate to probably where you want to be. And we'll walk through some examples of how things have been tracked previously for me and what I'm aware of. Hopefully that'll give you some ideas about what might work for you. So the basic of how do you start a plan or how do you create one? There's kind of that program management triad. We want it great, fast, and cheap. Well, that really is a unicorn. This one's a space unicorn, but that's never going to happen. You're going to get one of those. You might get 1.5 of those kind of traits, but you're never going to get a great, fast, cheap product. And that's whether you do it in-house or you have a facilitator. And to me, a facilitator versus a consultant is a facilitator, someone who knows the process, helps walk you through it, but you and your staff are the ones doing that work. Versus a consultant is someone who's going to come in and take most of the burden off of you. They'll certainly ask for stakeholders and input and still need your time, but they're going to be the ones who craft the plan, package it, and really make it pretty for you. I think the challenge for me is it's your story, it's your process. The closer you keep it in-house, if you want the support of a facilitator, great. But consultancy, I would use them cautiously and make sure that you're scoping their work in a way that fits your organization and the people that you have. We'll talk about people more as we move forward, but without the people, you're going to have a plan that sits on the shelf. So you got to have that buy-in. And then resources are going to affect what and how you do it. Do you have money to spend on it? Do you have the capabilities internally? Do you have the references or the resources at a neighboring agency that you can draw from? Do you have a template that you want to pull from? And then do you have the capacity, much to the two-person and to the two-person, 2 managers and 3 support staff? You may just not have the capacity to do something internally. Looking here, we've got a chat. It says, looks like the chart with 22 years should have a plan that looks out more years. Great comment, and I should have caught that when I did it, when I had that slide up. So our strategic plan, we are focused on a 1-year piece. We have other planning processes that look farther out that are in the works. And I should have mentioned that in my introduction, I am the Assistant Chief of Strategic Services. This ties to the next comment here about, do we have a dedicated person? So in Clackamas Fire, we're fortunate to have some more staff in the other organizations. I'm the Assistant Chief of Strategic Services. I'm responsible for the planning processes and execution of those plans within the organization. And so that's my role and responsibility. And I have a temporary duty assignment individual who's helping me build some things out in that regard. So we're kind of a new administration with the fire chief coming in April of last year, and then him working and promoting his assistant chiefs and some other personnel, I think back in June or July. So we're still working on things. We're on a 1-year plan now. I think in future years, you'll see kind of the 1-year plan that we demonstrated with the goals. But behind that or adjoining that would be something similar to the Grand Rapids, where we are looking at the strategies over a 3-ish year period. Again, recognizing that 3 years even, just anticipate change. So what's missing? What's missing in the plan and in the planning process? From being involved with them for a host of years, from conducting them as a consultant, from leading them as a chief officer in a couple of organizations, from participating as a stakeholder, from working with the school district, from working with a fire cadet program on different planning processes or on strategic planning processes. We talk about the goals. Where do we want to go? We talk about what we want to achieve. We talk about the money that we have. But what we've missed is we've missed the people aspect. We've missed saying, we need people to put their heart into developing the goals. We need people to put their heart into executing their goals. If they don't have buy-in, we can have the best plan in the world, but it's not going to move. So really about empowering people and then execution. So we have people up front and we have people at the end of it. And then the execution piece is looking at that adaptability. So should it be a 3-year plan or a 4-year plan or a 5-year plan? And I think classically people would say strategic plans are usually in that 3 to 5 year category. You have to build in a way of being adaptable and looking downstream at what that means, because the execution of the plan for me can't be so rigid that you're subject to fail. And then accountability, responsibility versus accountability, effective and desired versus the accountability, which is really the after something's been completed, what's the status and is it done? And who can I talk to and make sure that we're on track? And what's the process or the structure to do that? This is a video. It's the introduction for the Lean Startup Conference. This is probably back from 2017, 2018. Has anybody, just raise your hand or put in the chat, heard about the Lean Startup philosophy? Again, it's probably 4 years or 5 years ago when the book first came out. But the idea of the Lean Startup is not, well, certainly for startups, but how do you process things regardless of your size, where you look at shortening the cycle of learning and building It's a great book. It speaks to why certain organizations, Toyota being one of them, were structured very differently than, say, GM, and how they transitioned from a small company to a large, but they did it on these short cycles of things. It's a great read. It's really case story based. I see, look just in the chat, if you're looking, there's a few people who have, a couple haven't. I see a little X up in one person's sign here. So just a mix of things. This is an introduction to the startup conference. It's about 10 minutes long. I'm gonna ask that you watch it and think about your organizations. So he's speaking to these folks in the startup conference, but really, how does he speak about it? You'll see him talk about, think about him leaning on people, think about him and how, what it means to be supportive versus indifferent. He'll talk about the newness of it. Again, we just sat here. How many people have heard of it? He'll speak to that. How many people have heard of your organization? Because when you come and you ask folks to give you input on your Parks and Rec department, or we ask people to come in and give input on our fire department, what do they really know about us? Because we're asking them to drive the future of us, but what do they know? Let's see. What does it mean to think like a startup? And what are the impacts of your middle managers? What have you empowered them to do, or what have you not? Where have you set them up, and is it where you want to drive? And then he gets into lean government, which I think is really pertinent for us. But ultimately, the last question that he asks, and so just put this in the frame as you watch it, is, are you ready for a challenge of leadership in a modern company? He says company, I'll say agency, because they really are one and the same. So a few minutes here. This gentleman's name is Eric Rice. He's not the founder of the Lean Startup, but he's probably the most vocal spokesperson because he wrote the book about it. I hope you enjoy his thoughts and are able to take the time as he addresses it to reflect on your own organizations and your own people.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. Thanks to every year I wonder, are people really going to come? And then they do. So I thank you for being here, and I thank you to the 100 countries on the live stream. If you think about 100 countries, you got to think about the many different time zones that are represented, and therefore what time of day it is in so many places. It's nice, bright, early in the morning for us. We have live streamers at all hours of the day, including some absolutely in the middle of the night. So for those dedicated to where it's midnight or later, thank you for being here. It is always an honor to bring such an incredible community together, and I thank you for being here. I have to correct something that Jennifer said, not as a criticism, but for something for us all to remember. This is not something that I created. So I wrote the book, it's true. And, when the press needs to talk to somebody about Lean Startup, I'm one of a couple people that they call, and that's been good for me in my life. So I appreciate that. Thank you all for making that possible. But I didn't make this or create this. Last night at the Ignite Talks, we were talking about the creation of Lean Startup community. I was recounting a story that the first time someone asked me for permission to create a Lean Startup meetup, they said, well, I'm thinking about doing this meetup group to discuss Lean Startup. Do you think it would be a good idea? I was like, no, that does not sound like a good idea to me. But you don't need my permission. What does that mean? You can do whatever you want. That seems like a waste of time, but good luck. And they did it without my approval, and they did it anyway. And hundreds of people showed up, and it was a huge success. And the next thing I knew, it was spreading from city to city. I didn't create that or make that. The global community of people who have made the Lean Startup movement what it is, are you in this room and people listening in. They're the ones who deserve the credit for this. And so I just want to make sure we all recognize that. Now, what's interesting, every year we do this conference, and I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, but not as many as you would think. Because the vast majority of people every year come to the conference are brand new to Lean Startup. In fact, every year, at least somebody comes up to me at some point to the conference, shake my hand. They usually tell me, I read your book yesterday. I was on a plane and I was saying, I just thought, oh, this is cool. And I Googled, learn more about it. And I was like, there's a conference and it's tomorrow. I got to be there. and so there's, somebody in the audience who read the book yesterday. I welcome you, and so many others. So the reason we build the conference primarily around networking and the chance to meet other people in the community is because, even though this is our 6th year, The vast majority of people who are ever going to hear about lean startup in this world have not yet heard about it today. So you, even though sometimes you can feel like, well, I'm kind of late to the party, you're actually quite early in the grand scheme of things. And so I really want to encourage you to feel like there's not some set of insiders who know the community well or anything like that. The people around you are as new as you are. And I encourage you to meet them and to connect. And in fact, someone was talking to me before the conference. They said, it's going to be really nice for a change not to have to argue about lean startup for a couple days. You know what I'm talking about? The resistance we all face every day. You know, when we are evangelizing this new set of ideas and trying to convince people, and there's, you know, people in their organization, in their comfort zone, are used to doing things a certain way, and it can feel hard to push them out of that. And so enjoy a couple days off from the resistance and the confusion and the difficulty, and enjoy meeting people who share a passion with you. But don't take a few days off from critical thinking and from skepticism. It's really easy for us to get excited about how far we've come as a movement and how many people are here and in the live streams in the 100 countries. I feel like it's very easy to feel like we made it. We did it. The battle is won. But if you think about what I said a minute ago, that the vast majority of people who need this message have not heard it yet, that means that not only is the battle not won, it's only just begun. We're only in the very early chapters of this. There's a lot of people yet still working in the old way. I travel the world now and I meet companies of every conceivable size and sector, industry. I mean, I have just worked on some crazy stuff. If you look at the program last night and today, the case studies we were presenting, you know, from breakfast cereals to high science to consumer products to electronics, energy, I mean, you name it, there's examples. So all over the place, and yet everywhere I go, I still see the same things. I see waterfall product development. I see people who are convinced they already know what customers want. I see people working in functional silos. And I see organizations that as they grow, ossify and become bureaucratic and slow down. And everyone just says, well, that's just how it is when you get big or when your company is old. But it can't be right, because I meet companies that are 5 years old and that are 105 years old, and they're having the same problems. I meet with governments and nonprofits, and we're all having these same problems. And everywhere that I have gone, I've seen that there are opportunities to reverse that trend. It is not an inevitable thing. And that's really what I want us to talk about today. What does it mean to be a modern company, a modern organization, one that grows through continuous innovation and that leads to sustained growth over time? Growth not just in revenue and profit, but in impact, actually living up to the rhetoric we throw around so casually of making the world a better place. And I don't know about you, I think maybe the most cliche thing you ever hear now in business is that we want to think like a startup. You guys sick and tired of this already? Every company, we are going to be a startup forever. Every startup I meet with that's had success and has a few hundred, a few thousand employees, like they're going to stay a startup forever. Every big company wants to become like a startup. It's almost like a joke. Most companies I talk to, when someone says that, everyone's rolling their eyes and they're like, oh, great. But I always ask this question to the managers I meet with who say that to me. I say, oh, that's great. Being like a startup, that sounds good. Who's in charge of that? Whose job is it to make sure that that happens? And most people look at me and they're like, well, it's everybody's job, I guess. And we all know everybody's job means nobody's job. So we have this intention, we want to be more innovative, we want to think like a startup, but who's responsible for it? Who sets the standards for entrepreneurial thinking in the organization? Who makes sure that the rules and requirements and bureaucracy and process that we adopt as part of our success still permits entrepreneurial thinking? In fact, most companies, most middle managers I meet, they are paid to make sure no innovation happens. It's their job. And when I say that to most CEOs, they get so mad at me. I'm like, listen, you paid people in this company to make sure nobody innovates. They're like designed to eradicate it. They get angry. How could you say that thing to me? But I said, listen, we all have inherited a management system that is based on standardization of work and the elimination of variation. That is, you read any management text from the 20th century, the deep thinkers going all the way back to Ford and Deming and Taylor, it's all about standardization. And that made perfect sense for when we are trying to manage under situations of relative certainty. And of course, in the Lean Startup movement, we talk all the time about what do you do when you're in a world of high uncertainty? How do you deal with the fact that sometimes we're going to get positive variation? So the people in the organization whose job it is to standardize work, to make sure everyone is on the same page and working to the same standard, their job is to prevent variation, which means prevent innovation. So what do we do about it? That's the conversation we're going to have over the next couple of days. What does it mean to be a modern company where innovation is not just permitted, but welcomed? And I want to kind of sketch out what I think is an interesting outline of this, this new picture that is starting to emerge. And I want to tell you kind of three strands of thought that kind of combine into this. You're going to hear over the next couple of days, you're going to hear from the classic Silicon Valley startups, the hyper-growth companies that are in the news every day that we all, those of us who grew up in the Valley or find ourselves of that Silicon Valley mindset want to be. And we're going to hear from some very large organizations, some of the world's largest, that have adopted Lean Startup and used it to build a transformation. And we're going to hear from some governments. People hear that like lean government, isn't that an oxymoron? But it's the government story I want to pick up on because these three strands have more in common than people think. And when I travel and talk, nobody ever believes me when I say that. So these three situations have a lot in common. And so last year at the conference, we got to hear the story of healthcare.gov. Anyone remember healthcare.gov, the big mega government disaster project? And we got to hear from some of the folks who led the transformation, the rescue effort to save healthcare.gov and therefore have major influence over the course of political history in the United States. And what's interesting about the healthcare.gov, this is like a trick I want to teach everybody. I've used this a lot since the healthcare.gov disaster and subsequent rescue. I meet with CIOs and executives from companies and I say, tell me about the new initiative you're planning. And they'll say, oh, we have this plan. We're going to build this thing. We've got the requirements figured out. And I say, oh, the healthcare.gov plan. I'm sure it'll work out great for you. And so many, they get so mad when you say that to me. Like, how dare you suggest? I say, well, let me draw you a little chart of what healthcare.gov did, right? Big requirements planning up front, everyone working in separate individual silos, a huge absence of accountability or integration tests. Right? So you walk through the list, and let me walk you through what you're planning to do. Oh, the same. So why would you think you're going to get a different result? So you can try this at home. It's very effective because it's this large scale failure. But what's really interesting about it is not the rescue and the failure itself, but what's happened afterwards. I was just in DC a few weeks ago, and because of that crisis, the people in the federal government who have been for years through the entirety of the Obama administration and some before advocating for lean startup in government, for agile practices in software procurement, for a customer-centered, user-centered design process for government products. Those people got thrust into the limelight and were given a huge opportunity to build change. And that pattern is something we see in a lot of different organizations. The kind of critical mass of pre-planning and voices in the wilderness. For some of you, that's you. I've been crying out for this for how many years? Comes to be a point where you achieve a critical mass and you realize, the executive leadership of the organization says, okay, now I see that this is the way, and this thing needs to be the way that we work across the whole organization. I have seen that pattern play out in hypergrowth startups, in big companies, and governments alike, and it's pretty exciting. So I guess what I want you to be thinking about as we go into our talks and breakouts and meetups and opportunities to talk to each other is, are you ready for that moment when it comes? Because I think it can feel impossible. It can feel like, you're converting people one person at a time, hand-to-hand combat style to lean startup. It can feel like that's not big enough, that's not fast enough, that's not going to get me where I need to go. And yet so many of our speakers will attest to once you reach the critical mass, once you hit that tipping point, it happens faster than you think. So we hope over the next few days, we will prepare you for the challenge of leadership in a modern company.
So thank you all for walking through that with me. I think.
Good morning.
Whoop, I found out a couple things. One, don't try to click the chat box while the video is playing in PowerPoint. That doesn't work out very well. And two, despite trying to be quiet, people can hear your papers. So thanks for catching me on that, Todd. So as I listen to this, I like it. Not just the lean startup piece, which I'm a fan of that model, but this introduction to the conference really catches a few things that I think are relevant to strategic planning. And this course kind of started off as an abbreviated piece from something I developed last year for the Metro Fire Officers, Chief Officers Academy piece. But he leads in and he starts by giving credit to others. I mean, he wasn't necessarily like, yeah, you should go do that meetup thing. But he recognized and addressed to the crowd, to others, despite that this is where his business has taken him, that he didn't create this, that others were part of it, that the community was part of it. He also walks through and then he speaks to where people innovate or are stifled in innovation. And he speaks to the middle manager piece, but that speaks to, for me, the expectations of the middle managers. It speaks to the expectations of process. And it really conflicts with a lot of what we do. If we want people to innovate, how do we do that in a way that encourages them, but doesn't disrupt or doesn't cause the aberrancies that can interrupt service levels? How do we grow that appropriately? And then he talked about changing the tipping point, particularly with healthcare.gov. But as you have change and you have need for change, you get there oftentimes when that tipping point comes. Great book by Malcolm Gladwell, I believe, as well. Tipping point was. But how do you do that? And how do you do that in a frame that empowers others without leaving those behind? So, and I speak to that with the folks that built healthcare.gov, or the managers and the people who are the technical experts that built it that way. As you shift, or as they shift to this new agile model of breaking up the teams and working differently, how do you keep everyone feeling valued? Because if we have valued people, we can move the organizations forward. So speaking of people, as I mentioned, they're the heart of our system. Hopefully they're the heart of yours. And they're our most important asset. Oftentimes a business will look at them to a degree as a liability, right? Because they cost money, they take away from the bottom line. But more and more you'll see organizations, ours included, using the term for human resources. We don't have a human resources department anymore. We have a human capital department because we recognize that while people aren't bringing a monetary value all the time to our organization, they bring values in our services, in their ideas, and sometimes their ideas reduce our costs. But so we were looking at them just more holistically and how they contribute, and we give back to them. So if you think about where you start on this kind of spectrum of engaging people, we have stakeholders, we have them internally, and we have them at different levels and different styles. One of our challenges being a fire district, perhaps it's the same for Parks and Rec, perhaps it's the same for a sanitary district, is you have the end result, you have the end customers, and oftentimes in communication, we focus on those terms, or we focus on that external service delivery that we're all working towards, and we can forget to mention or highlight how included, or maybe we're not including them enough, the support pieces that go to that, whether it's finance, fleet mechanics, or support services, logistics personnel. But those are all different stakeholder groups, and we need to recognize and appreciate all of them and make sure that they all know that we do appreciate them. And we have external stakeholders, and sometimes we miss the boat on that as well. I'll catch that on the who slide next. But internal or external stakeholders, engaging them early and communicating with them is an important piece. And that's just across the road. We had an interesting discussion just amongst a few of us in the district the other day about what's our district like, what's our communication style. We're made up of, I think, 11 different agencies at this point. We're certainly not a small agency, but we're not as big as Tualatin Valley or Portland or Eugene. So what's our communication style? What's the expectation for the finance tech to ever see the fire chief, or the firefighter to ever see the fire chief, or to see me as an assistant chief, or to contribute? What's our style going to be, and kind of just that conversation. How do we want to engage our volunteers and our employees and the communities? Having empathy. I have a video in my day-long piece that Simon Sinek did on empathy. Care for your employees, care for your volunteers, care for your customers. We hire firefighters and we hire paramedics. Ultimately, what I want to focus on as we hire is people who are compassionate and people who care. We can teach the skills, we can train people to do different things, but if we hire those folks and then we reflect that for them, and we take the time to acknowledge them and the challenges that they're facing, or to be interested in them as individuals. We feel that connection, and at least in our experience, that's given back to us. Empowerment is kind of the outcome of all these things. So if you're working with folks and you're giving them the opportunity and you're giving them a structured place of which to implement changes or their ideas, or maybe their ideas aren't implemented because they don't work in the greater context, but you give them that feedback. You say, hey, thanks for that idea. Appreciate you, bringing that forward. Here's what I need from you to kind of understand that better. Please do the homework on it. Because otherwise the Great Idea Club will just give you everything they have and expect you to do the work. And it's their idea. They should be closest to it. But in the bigger context of things, it may not work, but give them that feedback. Say, hey, thanks for bringing this forward. This is why it's not going to work. And try to keep that engagement and that empowerment up. And at least I think ultimately downstream is you're looking for trust between you as a relationship and the ownership that they have in the district. Special Districts Association. We're a district. It's easy to speak to that term. And trust for me is really consistency in word and in action. They may not like the direction, or they may disagree with the decision of the organization, but if we're consistent, at least it's not looked at as inequitable treatment of employees or favoritism, or they don't know what they're doing. We're consistent. The employees may not agree with it, or the volunteers may not agree with it, but at least they can predict where we're headed and how we're going to handle situations. And then ownership, again, it goes to that affair or effective piece that we can't drive. That's something that comes from within. But if we care about people, if we're empathetic to them, if we value them and they see that and it's demonstrated, that's typically something that people want to get behind. And so that's where we're headed. Who do you want to involve in strategic planning? Well, for me, there's kind of really three different groups. You have a planning team, you have the internal stakeholders, and then the external stakeholders. The planning team, certainly, I want to include people who are interested, because that's part of that empowerment piece. I need to include subject matter experts. I may or may not include members of the community. It just depends on what my district is structured as, and what those community members add to it. Sometimes you need that resource because you don't have capacity internally, but you have external individuals who are willing to contribute. And then certainly just agency members generally across your staff. Internally, stakeholders would include elected officials, volunteers, internal facing and external facing staff. And by that, for us, external facing staff would be the firefighters, the paramedics, the fire inspectors, the investigators. Doing that external work are public educators, where internally I would look at people doing archiving, people running the IT systems, or individuals that are maintaining our fleet vehicles and running payroll. They're doing that internal customer service. And then from an external perspective, and this is one area where I think agencies try to do great outreach, but I think we fall short on occasion. So we want to try to get a good cross section of demographics, whether that is primary diversity or secondary diversity. You're looking at the geography of where people are at. You're looking at their incomes. You're looking at their social backgrounds. And one place I think that we miss, because it's hard for individuals, Alice, if you haven't heard it, asset limited, income constrained, but employed individuals, or houseless individuals, oftentimes they don't have the resources or the time to participate in what we're looking to do. I think it's easier for someone who owns their own business or is associated with the Chamber of Commerce to participate in a 2-hour lunch focus group than it is for someone who's piecing together 2 or 3 jobs, trying to jockey childcare and make ends meet. But that customer is just as important as the small business owner who can take time out for that focus group. So I don't know how to achieve that, but I know that's a place that we need to be looking, so we can make sure that we're serving all of our customers the way that we need to. And then partner agencies. We don't operate in a vacuum. I doubt there's anybody on this call that operates in a vacuum with their services. So making sure that those groups are engaged as well. as a critical piece. And hopefully if you engage them and you respect them and you give them the time and appreciate their efforts and say thank you, hopefully when they do their strategic planning or they do projects, they're more apt because you're building this relationship to include you. And so you get to be in the ground floor of understanding what's going on, perhaps have some input, or at least be more aware for when changes need to happen or when you get impacted by their endeavors. This is the one of the last pieces I want to share just about participation. And I'm going to have to give credit. I apologize if I am mistaken about this, but I believe this was, I first saw this with Christy Munson at the SDAO conference, probably 2 years ago. I think she was doing a piece on board relationships. And she had shared this as the public participation spectrum. She kind of took it as kind of like, how do you engage the board? I see it as, how do you engage the board? How do you engage the public? How do we engage employee groups or the Volunteers Association or any of those pieces? It can be used in kind of this multifaceted way. And I keep it on my desktop, or as an icon for easy reference, because it's important that we set expectations. This is a kind of 3-step process with different opportunities in there. So if you look here, the purple boxes, what's our public participation goal? What's our promise to the public? And what are some ways that we can do that? So they have the arrow up here, but inform is kind of, hey, we're just sharing information, all the way down to empowering, which is, hey, we're giving away the decision-making power and we're going to let this other group or make that decision, and then we're going to implement it. I've got a little bit of a close-up of a couple of these columns here on the next slide. So we want to engage people, but we want to engage them in the way that is meaningful for us, that they know what's expected of them, and they know what we're going to do with that information. Much like the facilities technician that has this great idea that runs up the chain. What are we going to do with that information, and how do we get the feedback, and what's that feedback consist of? So in this at the top, like the consult one is, what's the goal for the public engagement? We want to obtain public feedback on decisions. What we're going to do is we're going to inform them. We're going to listen and acknowledge their concerns and provide feedback on how the public input influenced our decision. And then it has some examples of how you could do that. Focus groups, surveys, town hall, which is a little different and a little less, I don't want to say engaging, more advisory than the involvement column, which is we're going to work directly with the public to ensure that their aspirations are consistently understood and considered. And then they go down and they look at down below, and it says that we'll make sure that their aspirations and the alternatives are reflected in the alternatives we develop, and provide feedback on how we did that. So this is making sure that their comments and their input is directly used in the materials that we're pushing forward. And so this is a little bit deeper dive of stuff. So it's workshops and deliberative polling rather than just that cursory survey. Excuse me. And then there's a comment over here. Deanna is asking, what is the role of the board in strategic planning? Is it just to approve it, or are they also part of the process? That's a great question. And for me, I'm sorry, I got a tickle in my throat here. The role of the board, they are the public policymakers. It would be a misstep to not have them as part of that direction of the organization. When we're looking at where's the charted course of this, where's the endpoint of where we want to get to, as a chief executive officer, as the fire chief in this case, you're going to have all these initiatives that you want to move forward. And if you want support for those, it's helpful whether you have people within the organization, the employees and volunteers, or the elected officials on board as moving forward. I'm not saying that the board is the decider of the plan, although that may work for some organizations. But they need to be involved in that conversation. It gives the chief executive an opportunity to engage with them, having gotten their input in the plans being drafted of, hey, this is where the plan's at. It reflects what you're interested in, or maybe we're going a different direction and here's why. And it allows that engagement and that conversation. Again, the boards turn over a lot of power to their chief executive, and rightly so. But they should have a shared vision of what the end result is. We may get there differently. So do they approve it? I would certainly hope that they would approve it for a couple of reasons. It's the organization's the policy setting, it's going to drive the budget. And then for the chief executive, it also should become part of their employee evaluation, or their evaluation of, hey, are you making progress on that? What and why? For the chief executive, it provides a very concrete, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what we haven't accomplished. This is why we're behind on this. Kind of benchmarking for them for an accountability piece. And for the board, it provides that assurance of oversight and a degree of control and the ability to measure against something, rather than the chief executive just heading where they want to head, which could be perceived kind of, could be perceived by some elected officials as whimish, or just on a whim versus within a defined plan. So I think it's important that they're part of it and that they adopt it. Let's see, teams. So this is, I told you my boss, the fire chief, is big on teams. And again, he worked across the organization as he was developing kind of our philosophy and our values. And he worked and worked across the stakeholders before he adopted them. But we've come up with a new motto. We're here for you. That works internally as well as externally. Certainly for our external customers, Clackamas Fire is here for them. But for our internal customers, our primary focus is being here for them. My job, certainly I have some administrative and managerial responsibilities, but my job is to be here to support the folks that work directly for me and the folks across the organization. I had the opportunity the other day, I was just in our training office, and something I picked up out of that Simon Sinek empathy video, where he's talking to a barista, but the barista reflected that he really appreciated working at the Four Winds Hotel, in part because every manager that crosses paths with him asks, how he's doing and how can they help. I was in our training building the other day and just happened to run across one of our training officers. In my conversation with him, we were catching up about family and how things are going. And before I left, I asked him, hey, is there anything I can do to make your job easier? He's not in my chain of command. He's not between me and the fire chief or me and anywhere. He's in a different segment of the organization. But he paused and he thought, and other than, hey, if during the budget season you can get us more money, that'd be great. But he twice reflected that he really appreciated the ask. How can I help you? And he just, again, casual conversation, but it was emblematic of what people are looking for in their employment. They're looking to be supported and help move things forward. So then we have our acronym of TEAMS, which includes trust, which is built over time, easy to lose, hard to earn back, that empowerment philosophy, accountability. We're going to move things forward and we need to hold each other accountable. Our mindset and service are distinctly separate, but they're similar for this conversation of an outward mindset, not looking within, but considering the needs of others, considering how our actions impact others' energy, their efforts, their emotions, their ability to be present and accountable for the job. And then certainly when they go home, we want them to be in a position where they go home and are able to be with their friends and family, whatever that may look like. So by having a service mindset and an outward mindset, we hope to set them up for success, not just in the actual accomplishment of tasks, but also in the just how they're feeling about being here. And that takes into their mental health and well-being when they go home. Linda Adler has got a comment in here about, let's see. Yep, got a few comments in the chat about the boards. Andrea, I can't quite see it from a port of someplace, Typically has one conversation with each board member at the beginning of the process to get all their ideas on the table, and then look to see where they can align and bring back a synthesized list for them to discuss. I guess that's one thing to think about. It looks like they have it with each board member. Not sure of all of what the background for their process there, but I certainly would be mindful of public meeting laws as anytime you engage the board. See, Bill is sharing that if the board's not approving, then there's no reason to have a board. Linda is saying we have an advisory committee, and as a board, so it looks like she might be a board member, we are left out of the process other than to approve. But she's not impressed with that process. And the people of Clackamas County are lucky. Well, we like to think they are. And I live here, so I feel pretty lucky too. But we don't have quite the same landscape as some of those folks in the South or out in the Wallowas. A little different. So why do we want to do this? Because we want to get buy-in. So this is how I hope that whenever you get to that point, however rough the conversation's been or wherever you've been at, hopefully this is how ultimately your audience reacts to your announcement of what your plan is going to be.
Okay, we're going to take a 15-minute break. Then we're going to answer more questions.
You haven't said anything yet, and we're headed for bankruptcy. That's not gonna happen. That's not gonna happen. We'll be back with some answers. I know that you're mad at me and you're mad at all of them. How are you gonna fix the company? Okay. We're gonna go out there during this break, and we're gonna come back with a plan.
Don't push the chat
We're
box.
gonna come back with a plan for you. It's a 45-day plan. 45 days to get us back on track. 45 points. 45 points, 1 point per day. We get 45 points. We're back in business. We're going completely carbon neutral.
And that's really how, like, I just hope every strategic planning process gets kicked off or wraps up is just with that. Whoops, I'm learning here with this whole PowerPoint thing. I use PowerPoint a lot. This setup's a little different for me. And I also just want to go back, and I can't remember who had it on her screen name or his screen name. I have it on my signature for emails. I should have introduced it earlier on. My name is Brian Stewart. My pronouns are he and him. So if anyone wants to reference that, fantastic. I'm certainly an ally for all. Adaptability. So now we kind of talked about the empowerment piece, and now let's talk about the execution. And there's that adaptability and accountability pieces. So how do we take change in stride? So what's going to get accomplished? Don't do the math because the math doesn't work, but the premise is there. In your strategic plan, 80% of what you plan on, you might get done, or you're going to get done. 10% of what's in your plan isn't going to get done for whatever reason. And then another 10% of the plan is going to be new because something else comes up, an opportunity comes up, a grant opportunity, a relationship with a partner agency. So 80% is kind of where you're headed and what you think you might accomplish. And then the other things certainly just speak to change. So what could get in your way? I don't know, there might be a worldwide pandemic that happens, or you might not have a great read of what's going on. So this is a building out in Portland. Again, I'm a firefighter by trade. And it's next to a kayak water sports store. And I was driving by and I'm like, that building just seems out of place. The U means it should be unoccupied from a firefighting perspective. That's important. But it just kind of caught me as this is a weird looking building. It's in an industrial area, different era. Why is this looking like what it is? It looks from first blush like an unreinforced masonry building. And so then I drove down the alleyway just a little bit farther and I saw this. And I've never seen this before. but apparently this building was asphalt shingled with brick looking, with brick, a brick facade. And that's relevant here because sometimes what we look at and sometimes what we think isn't what's underlying. Now, if I had taken the time to stop and look here, I would have had a lot of clues that this is not an unreinforced masonry building. There's no tie rods. The windows are set flush with the exterior of the building. The cap on the top is inconsistent with URM construction. There's a whole bunch of indicators. But if I'm not paying attention, if I don't think about what it is, the way I'm going to attack this problem, the way that I'm going to approach it, the resources I'm going to assign to it, don't match what this is telling me. So we want to do that on the organizational level. So looking at an environmental scan, this is a key piece of understanding where you're at and what could affect you. It affects what you may look at in terms of when you make capital investments, what you set aside for capital investments, what your policies are going to be, what technology changes you have to implement, a whole host of things. So different perspectives. The one on the left isn't one that I would typically use as a reference for me. I like the one on the right, and I just apply it internally and externally. But the one on the left is a good descriptor for kind of a first look at things. So the macro environment really is the same list as to the right. PEST used to be the old term, political, economic, social, technological. Then some people added an L, then some people added another E. I'm sure people have different meanings for different E's and L's, but these are generally accepted ones. So what's the political and legal requirements that you're within? What's the social pieces? Certainly things are evolving and changing. What are the economic forces? Being on the outside of Portland, and as people seem to have shifted out from residing in Portland as much, we have a lot more growth and faster growth in terms of housing than we had originally predicted, at least in our jurisdiction. And I don't necessarily, and I think it, when Metro comes up with their new predictions, it'll have to have a different base assumptions. So looking at those on the external piece, and then from the internal or micro environment piece, what are the impacts on the governments and the communities and the trade associations? You have to look at and say, what is our organization? Are we a Parks and Rec department? Are we a cemetery district? What are we, and what do we need to be looking at? I don't know that because I'm not close to the work that all of you folks do. I know I'm close at the work that I do within the fire service, that I'm close to the work that we do within Clackamas County. And I'm aware of what happens at the state and the national and world level, and trying to look at what those downstream effects can be. But I would recommend that you do the same. But when you look at things, kind of look at both sides of it. You don't want to be, not everything's going to be Pollyannish, and it's not all going to be the kind of the Debbie Downer piece. So, if you look at things, look at it from the internal and the external environment. Look at the upside of things. Look at the downside of things. The quantitative and qualitative data, whether it's a pros or cons or looks positive or negative, what do those mean, and what are you benchmarking? The piece about the board earlier and their interaction, I think when you look at assumptions, and these are assumptions for the strategic planning process, the capital planning process, master planning, budgeting, and financial forecasting or projections, is trying to get the board to agree to what the assumptions are for the district. Or for the chief executive. If we as staff, we will advise the board, and I'm not going to just throw out, yeah, I think the housing market's going to go up 7% next year. We're going to do our homework. We're going to look at the indices that for that relevant indicator. We're going to bring those forward, and then holistically work to see the board adopt those. That gives us a staff direction to where we head. It helps hold the chief executive accountable for what that really direction is. And it allows the elected officials or that board, again, to have a metric to measure the chief executive against. And ultimately, internally allows us to be more nimble and hopefully have better planning, but be prepared to react to things because things will change. Speaking of things changing, the World Economic Forum every year in January, they publish a global risk report. So they've done it a couple different ways, but look at from a business perspective, generally, a lot of the risk managers and industry insiders that participate identify what they see changing or being a risk in the next few years. And for me, that speaks to what's going to change for us. What do I need to be ready to react and adapt to? And here you can see on the chart, you've got extreme weather, livelihood crises. I mean, certainly our inflation index is going up considerably. Cost of housing in this area is going up quite a bit. It looks like we've got 15 minutes to go. Thanks, Emily. And then infectious diseases and mental health deterioration. So these are things that just give me a part of a situational awareness of where we're headed, and things that we would educate our staff, our members, our volunteers, and the board about. And then the ICMA, International or City County Managers Association, CPSC, the fire accreditation folks, and the IAFF, which is the firefighter union on the national level, looked at what are the challenges moving ahead for the next 50 years. So increasing types of calls of service, declining financial resources, safety and health concerns, inability to adopt to new technologies. The specifics for this case aren't critical. It's the idea of what is relevant for your industry, what is relevant for your community for you to be looking at, and how far do you want to look ahead, and what do you need to be planning for? Because every hire that we make generally is a 20 to 30 year hiring. And we want people to be successful from day one and to be able to grow into what's changing, so they continue to add value to the organizations in their different roles and over that tenure. Lastly, in terms of adaptability, it's about change. It's about looking at things and being able to change there. So if you're familiar with Lean, plan, do, check, act is a piece. And then the build, measure, learn model is just shortens that cycle a little bit conceptually. And that's something that you would learn about in the Lean startup and other avenues. But so you build something, you measure it, you build your plan, you start implementing your plan, you see where the hiccups are, you see what's being successful, and then you adjust. Which takes us to accountability, because if we build the plan, now we've got to measure how we're doing. So we want to keep things moving. Who owns the plan? And we kind of spoke to this earlier. For me, there has to be an owner. We have to have buy-in. The board needs to have buy-in, needs to approve the plan. But for me, it's the chief executive's plan. It is that fire chief. It is the general manager of the sanitary district to execute that plan. And then, but again, we want ownership up and down and across in the community. It should be a broader plan, but in terms of accountability, it belongs to the chief executive. Who owns the strategy or the goal? This is broken out. If you remember ours, we have individuals assigned to different goals, and Grand Rapids had individuals with that backup assigned to things, but it wasn't a co-responsibility. One was a backup to the other. And are they MEES? We'll talk about that on the next slide. And then we'll talk about what's the reporting format and who are we reporting to. You don't need the same information for the general public that you need for the fire chief. You don't need the same information for the board of directors that you need necessarily for the logistics manager. So what's the reporting format? It's probably not just one. And then how do you share your success or lack thereof? We're not always successful. And if we share both our success and where we need to adapt or where we fail, that helps build trust. That's important with the community, and that's important with the board and chief executive relationships, as well as our relationships with all of our members. So MEES, mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. So if we're looking at making something, we don't want two people being responsible for the same thing. So mutually exclusive. If we're building a bicycle, we need to make sure that we have one person in charge of putting the tires on the bike as their responsibility. And if the other person has looking at building the rear end of the bicycle. Well, that includes a tire. So who owns that tire piece? Is it this person that was what they were assigned, or is it the back end person? Because those are not mutually exclusive. So how do you define goals, or you should define goals that are mutually exclusive, but you need them to be collectively exhaustive. So if we talk to all the pieces of the bike, but we never mention the handlebars in our strategic plan, then we're going to have a bike that we can't steer. So mutually exclusive is about accountability. Collectively exhaustive is about making the entire project be successful. So a couple of reporting options and tracking options. This is not ours currently, but the one on the left is just an Excel spreadsheet of the different goals and objectives and tasks. You can see those in big blocks, and they have just kind of this green, yellow, red piece. Green is good. Yellow is we got to watch it. Red is past due or it's in trouble. And then Excel can spit that into a pie chart or any number of other things for other reporting. So the left might be great for internal. It's an easy, if you have a shared document to keep track of it, great, everyone can kind of do things. If you're great with Excel, it's got a lot of opportunities to automatically adjust some stuff in terms of colors. And then that can spit out things into charts. And the charts might be more successful and more useful for a board presentation or to put in your annual report for the public. This is where we are currently at in Clackamas. We're using, this is tasks by planner. We are in an Office 365 environment. So this is included. And this is similar looking to a Kanban board, which allows us to have here our financial stability and health. This is the confidence building one. And this is our transparency building goals. Reminds us where the strategy is. Whoops. And then just different, the different goals underneath and tasks. You can assign these to different people, and then you can start to track them. So this is something that I would use to help keep track of things. We are encouraging our department heads to put information directly in here and update things directly in here, but we do have a process that we can go look at their information and bring it forward too. So people are unique, and everyone has a certain process that they may want to use. But for us, from a reporting perspective, for management, for the fire chief, and for the board, we want to standardize what that is, and this is our way of doing it. Here's just a couple of shots of the different goals or different viewpoints of the reporting for this piece. You can see on the left, hey, of the 18 tasks, 4 haven't been started. That's based on dates, and then input of whether or not you've done anything. They're in progress or late and then completed is what we have. Just a couple different views that for a simplistic, easy board report or report to the chief or to the community, quick, easy things to grab. It's an interesting tool. If you're in an Office 365 environment, I would suggest you look at exploring it. Where you do it isn't as important that you do it. The accountability is really important. We've moved from doing updates every 6 months to now, under the current administration, what we rolled out in August, we do updates and report outs on our strategic plan objectives and goals within our command and general staff every 2 weeks. They're expected to update their components ahead of the meeting. I'll review them, and then we'll have a report out and an interrogatory with division heads at that point. So we're touching everything frequently because we know it's easy for things to slip. And if we don't adjust resource-wise or priority-wise, we're not going to be successful. And then I'm going to slide just to a place that I would love to get to. So we are not here. This is one of different products out there. So Irving, Texas. Again, looking back to last year when I was building a much more substantial program on this, I ran across them and a number of sites. I happen to like their take on how they use open government. Open government is just a way of putting data out there for others to use. But you can see they've got a few things that they generate through there. It's a fantastic idea of putting stuff out there. You might get some feedback from folks that you find innovative or creative from the general public, and you might get feedback that is a little, hey, they don't understand. It's still feedback, take it and try to get better. So if you were to click on strategic plan on this box here, it takes you to this screen. And below each of the pictures, that's one of their strategies. You can see the status of kind of where they're at with goals. So the gray is not completed, green's on track, yellow is we're watching it, red's in trouble, and then blue's completed. So you can, from the public, can kind of just see, oh, hey, they're on track, they're doing well. Oh, I wonder what's going on with the financial sustainability. Since I'm a firefighter, I clicked on the picture with the fire engine. And we ended up with service excellence. Again, at the top, you can see the overall category and how they're doing, and then it breaks down to each piece. And then you can just keep drilling in. So this happens to be safeguard public safety, security, and health, 65% of the way through it. And how are they looking? Oh, we've got some green tasks, some yellows, some blues. Oh, what's going on with this yellow task? Click into it, expanding the electronic access to zoning cases. So this is as a citizen, as someone of Texas, as a community member of Texas, as somebody sitting over in Saudi Arabia or Australia, we can look at this and it looks like the latest update. They don't have anything necessarily huge here in terms of what the disruption specifically is, but they have the latest update about refining the map-based inquiry. So this is a continuous thing. As people update it, it gets published automatically to their website, and it provides that accountability and transparency and builds that trust, whether it's with the public or pick your labor unit, pick your union, pick your volunteer, pick whoever, they can delve in and find their own. So I know this, we've got just a couple minutes. So start with the ease in mind, I guess is where I would start. You got it. It's your people, it's your people, it's your people. And then the execution. If you don't have a plan of how you're going to adapt and how you're going to track this, you're not going to get down the road with your strategic plan. It's just critically important. You can make all the goals you want, you can make all the tasks you want, but if you don't have a way for people to buy in and then to hold them accountable and to communicate that, you're going to have challenges with your organization moving ahead. Lastly, happy to take any questions. I know it's just about 12 o'clock. Here's my information. Please feel free to reach out. It's my cell phone. If I don't answer, I'll give you a call back as soon as I can. Emails, I try to get back at least with a quick acknowledgement of the email every day. Might take me a day or two to get any answers to questions that you may have, but I'll try to get back as quickly as I can. With that, I'll see if there's any last questions. Or Emily, did you catch if there were any?
I did not. I know there was quite a few questions about, and you kind of touched base about like board interaction, boards just approving things or boards actually being a part of the process. Just a small plug from SDAO, we do have board assessments where we have consultants able to come in and look at your board practices, as well as the board duties and responsibilities trainings we have going on. That can help you if you feel like as a board member, things aren't going the way that Brian spoke about today, where board members aren't feeling empowered to help make choices. They're just feeling like they're there to approve things, but not really be a part of the process.
Fantastic. That's great insight. And I will say SDA has been a fantastic partner for me. I've been involved with Jason Jancy for years in the safety section. I love the newsletters that come out and I love the resources. If you don't make full use of them, make full use of SDO. Great customer service and great content. So with that, I appreciate everyone being here. It's a Saturday. It's a beautiful day, at least up in this neck of the woods. Please reach out to you if you have any questions, and just appreciate you all. Thank you.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining this session. Please make sure on the sessions page to complete the session evaluation. That will be there, as well as we'll get the PDF of his presentation uploaded to the sessions page, not just on the handout page. So that should be up today at some point. And thank you everyone for joining us on the conference. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.